Please welcome Assistant Professor at Montclair State University School of Business, Nicole Bryan, Professor of Citizenship Law at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Anna W. Shavers, and Director of Education and Scholarly Communications at Microsoft Research Connections, Rain Johnson. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here. We got a lot to talk about. I understand you're going to fill us in on some technological crime fighting, really, that's happening as we turn the tables, really, on the tech-savvy world of human traffickers, right? This is a big deal.
Yes.
Who wants to tackle it first?
So I think if you look at it, it's a $32 billion industry today. Yeah. And a lot of people, especially in America, we think that doesn't happen here. Our minors, our children are not being sex trafficked. That's something that happens in another country. And it's a huge issue here. Mm-hmm. And the thing is there's a lot of anecdotal stories like what happened on Facebook or what happened on Craigslist or what happened on this technology site. But there's not a lot of deep technical research, not research done by the top researchers around the world, looking at it rigorously to really understand, does technology enable it and make it worse, or can it stop it and maybe eradicate it? And so that's what our project's really about, is really looking at how are Johns, how are pimps using technology, how are some of the young victims using it themselves, unfortunately, and how do we understand the whole scope of how big the problem is?
Well, without being too confusing, it's ultimately trying to use technology to fight criminals' use of technology, right?
Absolutely. As Rain said, this is really focusing on commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so how is technology used to facilitate this exploitation of children? There are various guess about how many people are actually involved in this and how they get involved, how they use technology. And Microsoft is helping us to try to figure out some of these hard questions.
Now, Nicole and Anna, I want to start with you guys. I want you to take us through your proposal. But first, Anna, I got to ask, you're a law professor.
Yes.
Nicole, a business professor. So how do you get interested in a project funded by tech, really?
Well, I come at the human trafficking examinations through my focus on immigration and international gender issues. Mm-hmm. So my first interest in human trafficking was from the cross-border perspective, how many people are being brought into the United States to be used in a way, and prostitution primarily, because I focus on issues involving women and children and how they're being used. At our university, we have a conference now in its fourth year, interdisciplinary conference, and I'm a member of that conference planning team where we focus generally on the issues of human trafficking.
And what about you? I mean, this wasn't the obvious way for you to go with your profession, but you're using it, and why did this inspire you?
Yes, absolutely. Like Anna, we also look at human trafficking from a multidisciplinary perspective. And I think what we can say is, for sure, in the global era, with the context of globalization, we see more and more trafficking happening at home and abroad. And how business is involved, human trafficking, as we know, has devastating consequences. And it's not something that NGOs and governments can tackle on their own. Businesses can get involved, corporations can get involved, and especially companies, leaders like Microsoft. It's a matter, really, combating human trafficking is a matter of corporate social responsibility, and how we see the role of Microsoft in helping us do this research is really to figure out what are the next steps in terms of how to tackle it.
And this is ultimately evolving, through the use of technology, right?
Yes. Specifically, our project in looking at technology is to first see if we can come up with some terminology, clandestine language that's used in technology for the users of these children to find them, and for children maybe even to put their names, etc., make themselves accessible. And what we're going to do is try to look at the users as well as the children being used and figure out how they actually access the internet and other forms of technology, specifically looking at online advertising to get these two groups of people together.
Right, so specifically, is that what your team's going to be tackling?
Yes, we're going to first interview Johns, primarily men that have accessed technology in some way, at least interview them to find out if they use technology and how they used it. But also, through the cooperation of law enforcement agencies, talk to some of the children and people who are now adults who were children at the time, and how they use technology to make connections with these individuals, and then try to determine what this language is. You might remember, for example, there was a big campaign against Craigslist to try to get them to not facilitate this advertising. And they no longer do this, as I understand it. But there are other ISP providers, website providers that have also been accused of this. And many of them have the response that they have a ban against using their technology for these purposes, but there's no way for them to tell that these are actually being used in this way. So we believe that if we can get the language that's being used and then develop software that can be given or to maybe even sold, I suppose, to the ISP providers, the website providers, and also be used by law enforcement to determine what looks like maybe innocent language, but language that's being used to facilitate this market.
And so obviously one of the big hurdles in all of this is getting the participation. Are the Johns really willing to help?
Well, we're doing, in cooperation with an organization that sponsored us, that's had a study sponsored by the Department of Justice, where they have made contacts with over 40 John schools around the country. And they're going to help us to contact these various John schools, and we'll see how willing they are. We don't quite know yet, but that's one of the things that we'll be finding out.
And you're sort of talking about the language and sort of this, code. And so, what ultimately will come of cracking the code?
Well, the two main things are to help law enforcement detect when there is use of technology for this purpose, but also to help online advertising, people that own the online advertising, to detect when their systems are being used in this way, and then they won't be able to say they can no longer tell that their systems had this purpose.
Okay. So you guys said your project has 2 stages. Walk us through.
Sure, absolutely. In the first stage, our project is similar to Anna's, but also different in some important ways. We're trying to understand what is the overall mindset that Johns use when they approach the search process and how they're looking for victims. Are they starting offline and then going online?
Right.
What's the role of network technologies in that? And that really requires in-depth interviews among Johns, primary research among Johns, to find out where their head is and how they go about this. And then the second component involves an analysis of chat rooms and other pieces of technology that Johns use, whether they're looking for information on how to find a victim or actually providing information on reviewing victims and these kinds of things. So overall, how that universe is operating and how we can understand it in order to actually potentially intervene or at least understand it better so that we can create tools and solutions that would help crack the code on combating it.
Well, and it sounds like you guys, there's a lot of similarities in your projects, but a lot of key differences as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the key differences is we're specifically looking at the overall mindset and then the search process and how network technologies are involved in that through primary research among Johns schools, but then also outside of Johns schools. So Johns that go to Johns schools as well as those outside, including the let's say, heavy offenders, those who specifically prey on children. Yeah.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to absorb here. And you guys are right now ultimately talking to largely a technical audience. Do you have any asks of the viewers?
Well, I suppose the most important thing is if we are able to get this information, then the next step would be to conceptualize this software that can be used by law enforcement and also by the online providers. And so what can we do with this data that we actually get? Is it going to be valuable to create this kind of software? And I know that there have been various projects, especially in the United States, where they've approached this from a different angle. And so maybe people have even thought about how you can use coded language to develop the software that we'll be trying to develop eventually.
Rain, what do you think?
Well, I think the thing about technology and the internet today is that there's a feeling of anonymity. And because of that anonymity, more and more of our Johns are going online to find young women and young men. But then at the same time, we know that everybody online has a footprint. And so based on this great research that we get from these folks, can we get the best machine learning, the best privacy, cryptography researchers out there helping us go, okay, so if we know this language, we know this information, how can we detect the footprint? What kind of information can we give? How can we do this smart on the back end to help stop this? And I look at it, the second thing too is really from a policy perspective. So now that we understand these things, we've got some processes put in place, we've done some things to really disrupt the technology. Can we help give government some policies that they need to pass to really help enable this to be eradicated?
Now, obviously, the human trafficking is at the forefront of what we're talking about, but it seems like what you're saying too is this is the kind of thing is useful for, as you said, this anonymity on the internet, these message boards and the bullying and the things that are really becoming problems because people think they can just sneak in. I'll just make up a fake name, and I can just go do anything I want. There's sort of this living outside the law thing right now, but you're sort of kind of collaboratively working to sort of change that slowly but surely, right?
Absolutely. And trying to understand what we might think about is just innocuous kind of language. I know there's a popular television show where they talked about an online escort services for minors, and they talked about it as a social introduction service. Now, that's sort of terminology that's used for simple dating sites, for example. But we want to find out if it's used in other ways that facilitate this human trafficking.
I think it's really important for us to remember that human trafficking specifically targets people who are vulnerable and marginalized. And one of the ways that it does that beautifully, really, from the perspective of traffickers, is to use the internet and to use network technologies. And we want to understand how that can happen and actually stop that process.
Well, and as you said, it's a two-way street with the, anonymous nature of the people online. It sort of works with the folks sitting at home, too. Somebody thinks, well, why would I be targeted, right? I'm just some kid in my house. What's the big deal here, right? So what are some of the biggest challenges? I mean, you guys are trying to kind of forge new ground here. What are some of the biggest challenges from your perspective of what you're trying to do?
Well, one of the issues is that we're actually researching behavior that is illegal.
Right.
So we're trying to gain information on behavior that's illegal and also behavior that is attached to shame. Now, that's difficult in and of itself, combined with the fact that people can get away with this behavior by hiding online.
So it's obviously a very sensitive topic as well, and it's got to be sort of difficult. You're probably, researching things that are tough for you to understand and probably finding data that you don't want to find, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things we have to be very careful about when we talk to people involved in this is not getting information that we might have to reveal regarding their connection in some other way with other crimes, for example. So we have to be very careful about the interviews that we conduct. We have to decide who are the additional kind of players. For example, I recently read about a case where even a sheriff in a small town was helping young children advertise. And so we don't know all of the people that are involved in this. But if we talk to people like the children, or people, maybe even women who are still involved in the industry, how they first got involved, and the Johns, maybe we can begin to find out a lot of this information. You
guys have sparked a conversation already on Twitter. Folks want to weigh in on this because they're curious. We were talking about it, and we've got a tweet here that says, what kind of code words are Johns and pimps using? Of course, not that they want to use them. They're just saying this has sparked an interest, and I got to say, I, too, am interested.
So to give an example, and this is what gets me passionate about it, is ATM is used a lot. And, if you think about a John or pimp or organized crime could easily make up a fake bank, put up an ad saying ATM into the advertisements. Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, none of us would know. Because, banks all the time, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, small banks putting up those ads. And then the community, though, of Johns know that that's the word. And so they can go onto that ad, click on it, and it takes them to a special site where they can go and solicit and find girls. And so this is where we need the computer scientists, because we know that there's ways in the back engine to be able to trace, find that information, automatically look at that, and stop it. And so how can we take all of these terms as they start defining all of them and figure out processes and procedures to help online advertising not have those things happen?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of talked about an example there. I'm wondering if you could walk us through an example, not necessarily something you've seen, but I mean, how this works. Somebody at home sees something, they respond to? I mean, how does this escalate to that point?
Well, in some cases, it appears to be set up where it's basically people trying to meet up for the weekend, right? So looking to meet with someone. An ad might actually say, the posting might say, new in town, 200 roses. 200 roses is a code word for $200 typically, and that's for the performance of some kind of act, sexual act. New in town is often a code word used for someone who's young. So if you don't know that and you're new in town, you might think you're going to make a friend, right? But actually, of course, we know that the people who are actually looking for these know what they're finding when they find those terms.
I just wanted to add one thing, too. As Nicola said, both of our teams have brought together people from different perspectives.
Right.
So she's from the business school, I'm from the law school. My team, for example, has people from the journalism school that has expertise with respect to deciding how people advertise, etc. We have an expert who's in the business school whose real expertise is empirical research. And we have the director of our Jeffrey Rakes computer school who's going to help us try to think about some of these issues and how we can use this information. So it does take a real focus of people in a lot of different areas to try to come together to some solutions with respect to these problems.
Well, and you talked about the fact that you're ultimately studying behavior and actions that are illegal. There's shame attached to it, so that creates a very interesting dynamic when you are trying to get people to cooperate, and that had somebody on Twitter saying, you know, the Johns are really willing to cooperate. Why would they?
Absolutely. It's interesting. We've found that some of the Johns actually, after attending John School, feel guilty about what they've done, and in some cases didn't realize that children were involved, because some of the ways that victims present themselves is that they're not children and they're told to do that by their pimps. So once they learn that, they actually have daughters themselves and realize that this is something that we don't want to contribute to. In other cases, Johns are not going to be willing to participate, and we're fully aware of that. But at the outset, we do have people who are willing to participate because they realize that this is behavior that they've engaged in that they didn't realize was actually contributing to the exploitation of children.
Well, and Rain, you talked about it earlier, you know, looking to where maybe all of this is going. Do you think it's going to have to become like a government-regulated thing? We're going to have to get people all the way at the top to really stand up at attention and say, okay, we got to do something. We have to, you know, or is it through the use of technology, the kind of thing that we can maybe start policing much
Well, I think it comes from a top-down and bottom-up, both ways. You know, the Obama administration is having a big task force and has made this a very important piece, and we do have somebody from the Office of the President here at the Faculty Summit to really understand how we can work together and do something bigger and better. So I think that we do have that top-down work, and then at the same time, by taking the academic community and everybody out on the TV there working with us, we're going to get the bottoms-up approach too. And I think what's really important to think through too is just from a greater computer science perspective. And when we think about the need of more computer scientists in the world, taking on a social issue like this and something that really can change the world, and we can do something to save thousands of lives, I think this is going to generate a whole new generation of computer scientists wanting to become computer scientists to help solve the problem.
Which is interesting, because we were talking about you know, with any kind of innovation, you find a need and you try to do it better. In this case, it's something you wish we didn't have a need for. Exactly. But there is, in that it's perhaps kind of sparking a whole new profession and a whole new need for, like you said, you know, social scientists and engineers and all of the above, right?
Exactly.
And I think computer scientists can help us stay one step ahead of this. One of the things that I've learned recently is that pimps actually use social media like Facebook to target victims. So when a young girl posts, broke up with my boyfriend or having problems at home, they pounce on those victims.
So it's almost a reverse code word.
Yes.
Things they look for to say,
Yes.
here's somebody who's vulnerable, perhaps I can...
Right. So if we could use that information in the computer science community and actually create strategies to combat it, that would be outstanding.
Got another tweet that came in here basically with somebody saying, you've got me concerned, I want to help. For folks listening, joining us online right now, what could the average person do?
Well, many people take part in services. that they don't realize may be helping to facilitate. For example, in the hotel industry, many of the hotel owners have now become involved talking about corporate social responsibility, looking for indicators that their hotels may be used to help facilitate this service. So if you frequent a particular hotel chain, you might say, are you helping to make sure that your hotel is not facilitating this? So people can get involved in really grassroots kinds of levels, trying to make sure that various corporations are aware that their facilities or their internet service may be used in these ways.
And a lot of it has to do with awareness. The more we talk about this, the more people become aware and actually expose different activities that we see on Facebook and other social media that we might not have thought anything of. And now we say to a friend, well, are you sure you want to befriend this person? How do you know this person? And actually maybe come up with a set of tips and how to avoid being trafficked for our young population.
And I think you're right with the awareness factor. I mean, I'm happy to say and sort of alarmed that I didn't know a lot of this. I didn't know those words. I would have never imagined that phrase meant something else. And, you know, Rain, talk about Microsoft, you know, obviously trying to help forge the way here and putting an end. And talk about the law enforcement connection.
Yeah, I think that, you know, Microsoft, with the work with our digital crimes unit, has a long time history of working with different law enforcement agencies, Interpol, FBI, and looking at how do we stop the exploitation of children. And they've done CATS and lots of different applications to really help law enforcement to get at this. And they came to Microsoft Research, myself and Dana Boyd, and said, you know, there's a problem out there, and we're not sure if this is something that's really, really prevalent that should be our next big step. Is this something that Microsoft should really make a difference on? We've done a lot with child pornography online, and that's getting into a safer area, and people are able to take this on with the tools that we've created and the partnerships. Should we now go on to sex trafficking? And that's what got Dana and I really excited and really wanting to build this research community. And then I look at it from a second fold that I started earlier is, you know, my role at Microsoft is to grow the number of women computer scientists out there. And young women want to make impact. They want whatever they do to really change lives. And so I feel very passionate about that. If we sponsor the state-of-the-art research by the top women researchers solving big, huge world problems, we're going to get more and more young women to want to be computer scientists and to help change the world and solve these problems.
I want to give you each a minute to talk directly to the audience that is joining us live right now. You each have, you know, the same goal in mind, but, you know, different perspectives on things and what people can do, what you've discovered. Just a chance for you each to say something, sort of your parting words on, you know, what you have learned, what they can take away from it, maybe what they can do.
Absolutely. The computer science community is an integral partner in this, and if they can continue to analyze ways that predatory behavior like trafficking actually is occurring online using social media, that would be a huge step in this fight against trafficking.
What do you think?
And I think that some of the technology that's already been developed, if they can think about that and how it might help with the projects that we're involved in. I know that there's been some progress made with respect to detecting child pornography, for example, in various retail kinds of situations. I think some of that knowledge can be translated to our projects, and they would think about how they could help us would be very beneficial.
Is there any obvious place folks could go? I mean, you know, students and stuff. I mean, if they said, yeah, this is I would like to, you know, a more tangible direction. Is there somewhere they can go specifically to get involved?
There are a number of places. I guess I mentioned two. One is called the Polaris Project, which I think Microsoft also has a partnership with them, that really does some education, but also helping to facilitate getting the correct laws in various states. For example, in Nebraska, they're working with us with respect to our legal system. And also, there are a number of conferences that provide a lot of information at our university. Each year, we provide a human trafficking conference, so they could go to our website and find more information and look at some of the papers. So those are just two that I would mention, but there are a number of places that facilitate getting information out to the public about this.
Great. Rain, final word.
I think the biggest thing is that if there are researchers out there who really want to work with us and are excited about this topic and want to understand how to do more, if they go to researchmicrosoft.com and put in the search human trafficking, you'll get to my website and our contact information. We'd love to have you get involved. I think the second thing that's also important is as people are trying to build up their research and understand this area better, if they go to Shared Hope, which is another great NGO that we work closely with, they've built research and scorecards for every state in the country about how they are when it comes to human trafficking. And that will give a lot of knowledge and understanding and where to start.
That's great stuff. Thank you all so much, not only for being here, but for everything you're doing. This is a really, really important work, and we appreciate your time, your advice, and everything.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you
So much. All right, thank you all. Nicole, Anna, Rain, compelling look at technology's role, good, bad, and human trafficking, and good luck with your projects, of course. We have had a busy morning, vanishing glaciers, Nui, Dewey, I think Louie, and crime fighting with technology. And waiting in the wings, we'll hear about some looming changes that could affect internet governance with potentially big impacts for researchers. In the meantime, why not take a minute to contemplate the history of everything? No kidding. There's a tool that makes big history comprehensive and comprehensible. Take a minute to travel through time with ChronoZoom.
Welcome to the history of everything, and welcome to ChronoZoom. ChronoZoom is a window into the world of big data. It bridges the gap between the humanities and the sciences through an infinite canvas, allowing the exploration of data throughout all of time. Our time scale is dynamic and allows for us to explore all of history from today until 13.7 billion years ago when time began. ChronoZoom is a visualization tool allowing for the first time people to mash up data from all sorts of different places in different formats, enabling new insights that would have never been possible before.
For 10 years, people kept saying, well, where's the crater?
This is Walter Alvarez, the visionary behind ChronoZoom. Probably one of the most significant features of ChronoZoom is the fact that it's backed by the power of Windows Azure. Windows Azure allows for scalability both in compute horsepower as well as database, data repositories, and storage. From doing mashups of all this big data from all sorts of disparate data sources, scientists, researchers, even students can discover new things they would have never been able to discover before.
Hello, my name is Cecily. This timeline is part of a project I've been working on for my big history class. Let me take you on a brief tour.
This is a story about the Japanese-American internment during World War II, explained through the lives of a couple named Arthur and Estelle Ashigo. ChronoZoom allows for telling stories about cultural preservation and connecting digital humanities and the sciences. One of the more surprising things that happened while we were developing ChronoZoom was one of the students was putting together the timelines of Galileo and Newton. Common theory has that these two great scientists collaborated extensively, but when we looked at the data and when we looked at ChronoZoom, it was evident that they never had the chance to even talk to each other, as Galileo unfortunately died before Newton was ever born. Through the power of ChronoZoom's infinite canvas, new insights can be discovered, both within time and across time. As we come back out of humanity and back out of pre-human history, back out of life and of Earth and to the cosmos, trends can be observed between timelines of great historical proportion that can help influence our understanding of the future.
Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.